lumipat po ako kasi dito, wow, I was a wreck. So, parang pagpasok ko dito,
Alex, can you tell us about the match earlier? Seems very interesting.
Yeah, it was super fun. My very first mix.
Mali is totally different to other countries because cattle roam the streets. Cattle shit on the ground. People
Destroyed on live television. That is the only phrase capable of capturing the intensity of what happened when a single broadcast moment became a public storm that nearly shattered a young athlete's confidence. The cameras rolled, the lights blazed, and across millions of households in the Philippines, televisions displayed what should have been a routine evening news segment. Instead, it morphed into a moment of pure spectacle, a public spectacle so severe it threatened to define the trajectory of Alexa's career before it had fully matured. Alexa, a 20-year-old tennis player already burdened with the hopes of an entire nation, found herself the subject of ridicule from one of the most trusted voices in Filipino media. This was not simply an opinion that sparked debate. It was an act that cut deep, attacking a young woman who had devoted her entire life to mastering a sport that requires extraordinary discipline, resilience, and focus. The consequences were immediate, the backlash inevitable, and the aftermath far-reaching. Welcome to Gulf Vibes, where we strip away the sanitized headlines and reveal the raw, unfiltered reality behind the news. Today's story is not about a match score, a tournament draw, or even a fleeting controversy. This is a story about national pride, media influence, the fragility of youth under scrutiny, and one young athlete's struggle to rise above it all. This is the story of how Alexa became the center of a media firestorm, how she was publicly humiliated by her own country, and how the most improbable defender imaginable came forward to challenge the narrative. To fully appreciate the moment, consider the setting. Evening news broadcasts in the Philippines are a cornerstone of daily life. Families gather, trusting anchors to deliver information with professionalism and authority. And at the center of that trust sat Mel Tienco, a journalist whose career spans decades. She is more than a reporter. She is an institution. She has delivered news through political upheavals, natural disasters, and moments of national triumph. Her face is familiar to Filipinos in a way that borders on familial. Her word carries weight. Her judgment commands respect. Yet on this fateful evening, everything changed. The discussion focused on Philippine sports, then narrowed to tennis, and finally landed on Alexa. The topic was a momentous one. Could Alexa represent the Philippines in upcoming international tournaments, including the prestigious US Open? For a nation that had never before produced a tennis player of Alexa's caliber, this should have been an occasion for celebration, for pride, for unity. Instead, it became an execution under the unforgiving glare of live television. The dismissal was subtle at first, a wave of the hand, a gesture that seemed to physically push the idea aside. But subtlety quickly gave way to scathing words. "Don't embarrass the nation," Tienco said. 4 words. Simple, concise, devastating. They carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken criticisms. The message was unmistakable. Alexa was not good enough, not ready, not worthy of representing her country. Failure was assumed, humiliation inevitable. The cruelest aspect of the statement was its tone. It wasn't constructive. There was no advice, no encouragement. There was only derision, a sneering dismissal punctuated by a laugh that suggested the idea of Alexa competing internationally was not merely unlikely but laughable. For a young athlete who had spent years sacrificing ordinary adolescent experiences, who had trained in the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, who had competed in junior Grand Slams and clawed her way up the professional circuit, the words were a blow that landed harder than any opponent's forehand. The immediate reaction was shock. For a brief, surreal moment, millions of viewers were silent. Then, like a pressure cooker releasing steam, the explosion began. Social media erupted. Twitter feeds became battlefields. Facebook comment sections overflowed with outrage. Hashtag #RespectAlexa trended within hours, fueled by fans, athletes, journalists, and ordinary people who couldn't fathom how a trusted media figure could publicly humiliate a young competitor who had done nothing but represent her country with dignity and effort. The fury wasn't only about the insult, it was about the power imbalance. Alexa was not a celebrity seeking attention. She was a dedicated athlete, a professional in a demanding and punishing sport. Yet in a matter of seconds, her credibility and potential were questioned by a voice that carried national authority. The criticism extended beyond social media. Analysts, sports psychologists, and commentators weighed in. They discussed the long-term impact of such public humiliation on a young athlete's confidence and mental well-being. The psychological burden of knowing millions are watching, waiting to see you fail, can be paralyzing. The expectations placed on young athletes are already immense, but to have those expectations weaponized against them is a form of pressure few outside the sports world can truly comprehend. Alexa had spent her entire life preparing for high-stakes competition, yet her own country's media was preemptively writing her off, predicting humiliation before she had even stepped onto the court. The cruelty was magnified by the sheer absurdity. A moment meant to inspire pride in a rising star became a national critique, undermining the very foundation of support that athletes need to thrive. As the outrage mounted, a sense of despair could easily have overtaken Alexa. But this story was far from over. While the Philippine public and sports community debated the ethics and impact of Tiangco's comments, an unexpected twist reshaped the narrative entirely. Enter Pauline Hanson, the Australian politician known for her unfiltered rhetoric, her polarizing positions, and her career built on controversy. To anyone observing from a distance, the idea of Hanson defending a young Filipino tennis player seemed ludicrous. Yet that is exactly what happened. In a statement that caught both political analysts and sports commentators off guard, Hanson publicly condemned the treatment Alexa had received. She called out the ridicule, criticized the destructive culture of tearing down young athletes, and urged support instead of derision. In her words, Alexa was carrying a nation on her shoulders, and instead of receiving encouragement, she had been met with mockery that was, in Hanson's words, unconscionable. The absurdity of the situation only amplified its impact. An Australian politician, often criticized for inflammatory remarks about other nations, was now defending a young athlete from a foreign country against her own media. International outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Suddenly, a controversy that had simmered primarily on local social media erupted onto a global stage. Headlines ran across Australia, Europe, and the United States. Sports and cultural analysts debated the ethics, the politics, and the national implications. For the first time, the conversation shifted away from whether Alexa was good enough. The focus became the culture of media criticism, national pride, and the responsibility of broadcasters to uplift rather than destroy. Alexa was no longer merely humiliated on live TV. She had emerged as a symbol of resilience, a young woman standing against the cruelty of those who should have been her biggest supporters. Inside the broadcasting network, tension ran high. Sources reported that Tiangco herself was unsettled by the fallout. The international attention, the wave of criticism, and the intervention of a foreign politician created a moment of reckoning. No apology followed. No clarification was offered. Only silence, loud and uncomfortable, filled the airwaves. Internally, executives debated how to respond, aware that their credibility and influence had been tested in front of the world. The public, however, had already made its judgment. The narrative had shifted irreversibly. Alexa had become a story bigger than tennis, a story about courage under fire, about the consequences of unchecked media power, and about the extraordinary resilience of a young athlete who refused to be broken. Meanwhile, Alexa herself prepared for her upcoming matches, fully aware that each serve, each rally, and each victory carried monumental weight. Beyond rankings and statistics, her performance had become a statement. Every point played was a rebuttal to those who doubted her, a challenge to a culture that sometimes prioritized cynicism over encouragement. Every win had the potential to inspire a generation of young Filipino athletes, who were watching and learning that perseverance, grit, and dedication could overcome even the harshest criticism. The pressure was enormous, yet it also imbued her efforts with historic significance. This was more than a match. It was a cultural moment, a chance to redefine expectations and break barriers. The tournament stage was set. Monday morning in Melbourne approached, and the anticipation was palpable. Tennis fans worldwide marked their calendars. Filipino communities across the globe adjusted their schedules to witness a potentially historic breakthrough. Media outlets, initially critical, were now compelled to follow her journey closely, documenting every nuance and development. Alexa was no longer simply a player. She was a symbol of national pride, international discourse, and resilience in the face of adversity. The stakes were immense. Victory in her next match would secure crucial ranking points, elevate her status in professional tennis, and provide momentum for the rest of her season. Beyond personal achievement, every point contributed to the larger narrative of Philippine tennis. Alexa was blazing a trail in a sport where her country had limited history. Young athletes were watching, inspired by her courage and commitment. Each breakthrough, each victory, expanded the horizon of what was possible for those who would follow. The entrance of Pauline Hanson into the story transformed the entire landscape. Known for her fiery rhetoric and controversial positions, Hanson's defense of Alexa seemed impossible at first glance. Yet, with the same blunt intensity she brings to parliamentary debates, Hanson publicly condemned the treatment Alexa had received. She criticized the cruelty of Tyenko's remarks, highlighted the immense pressure placed on young athletes, and called for unwavering support instead of ridicule. In her words, Alexa was carrying an entire nation on her shoulders at just 20 years old, and rather than receiving encouragement, she had faced public humiliation from those who should have been her biggest champions. The irony was undeniable. A foreign politician, often scrutinized for her controversial statements about other nations, had become the unlikely defender of a Filipino athlete against the Filipino media itself. The absurdity of the situation only amplified its impact, and the story immediately gained global traction. International media outlets picked up the controversy. Sports networks that had never covered Philippine tennis suddenly ran stories, analyzing the social and cultural ramifications. The narrative shifted in an instant. Alexa was no longer the target of ridicule. She was a symbol of resilience, a young woman standing tall against an unfair system, and an inspiration to anyone who had ever been doubted or dismissed. Back in the Philippines, the reaction was electric. Social media became an arena for debates, arguments, and passionate defense. Fans praised Hanson's intervention, some surprised, others incredulous, but nearly all unified in support of Alexa. #RespectAlexa continued to trend, bringing attention to both the athlete's accomplishments and the toxic culture of media scrutiny. Analysts dissected Tyenko's words and delivery, questioning the ethics of using a national platform to mock a young person's potential. Sports psychologists weighed in on the psychological toll of such public condemnation, noting that Alexa's response in the coming tournaments would be as much a test of mental fortitude as of skill. In households and tennis communities across the Philippines, people discussed the broader implications of the incident. The conversation had shifted. It was no longer about whether Alexa would succeed. It was about how a nation treats its heroes, how media influence can shape or destroy confidence, and how resilience can emerge in the most unlikely ways. Within the broadcasting network, tension ran high. Sources reported that Tyenko herself was unsettled by the fallout. The international attention, the wave of criticism, and the intervention of a foreign politician created a moment of reckoning. No apology followed. No clarification was offered. Only silence, loud and uncomfortable, filled the airwaves. Internally, executives debated how to respond, aware that their credibility and influence had been tested in front of the world. The public, however, had already made its judgment. The narrative had shifted irreversibly. Alexa had become a story bigger than tennis, a story about courage under fire, about the consequences of unchecked media power, and about the extraordinary resilience of a young athlete who refused to be broken. Meanwhile, Alexa herself prepared for her upcoming matches, fully aware that each serve, each rally, and each victory carried monumental weight. Beyond rankings and statistics, her performance had become a statement. Every point played was a rebuttal to those who doubted her, a challenge to a culture that sometimes prioritized cynicism over encouragement. Every win had the potential to inspire a generation of young Filipino athletes, who were watching and learning that perseverance, grit, and dedication could overcome even the harshest criticism. The pressure was enormous, yet it also imbued her efforts with historic significance. This was more than a match. It was a cultural moment, a chance to redefine expectations and break barriers. The tournament stage was set. Monday morning in Melbourne approached, and the anticipation was palpable. Tennis fans worldwide marked their calendars. Filipino communities across the globe adjusted their schedules to witness a potentially historic breakthrough. Media outlets, initially critical, were now compelled to follow her journey closely, documenting every nuance and development. Alexa was no longer simply a player. She was a symbol of national pride, international discourse, and resilience in the face of adversity. The stakes were immense. Victory in her next match would secure crucial ranking points, elevate her status in professional tennis, and provide momentum for the rest of her season. Beyond personal achievement, every point contributed to the larger narrative of Philippine tennis. Alexa was blazing a trail in a sport where her country had limited history. Young athletes were watching, inspired by her courage and commitment. Each breakthrough, each victory, expanded the horizon of what was possible for those who would follow. The pressure was compounded by the media storm that preceded her. Analysts discussed potential outcomes, predicted challenges, and speculated on how the controversy would affect her performance. Critics questioned whether the psychological toll would weigh her down, while supporters argued that it would fuel her determination. Every perspective added tension, creating an atmosphere that transcended sports and entered the realm of cultural spectacle. Alexa's story had become an intersection of athletic performance, media ethics, national identity, and the resilience of youth. The narrative surrounding her journey had evolved into a case study for the world, demonstrating how one public figure's cruelty can backfire and inadvertently elevate the subject of ridicule into an icon of perseverance. The tension reached its peak as match day arrived. Courts were prepared, schedules set, and cameras positioned to capture every moment. Alexa's opponent, aware of the attention and stakes, readied herself for a battle that was now as much psychological as it was athletic. Commentators analyzed potential strategies, focusing not only on skill and technique, but also on the mental resilience that had become a defining feature of Alexa's narrative. The match was more than a contest of talent. It was a proving ground for a young athlete who had faced and overcome public humiliation, criticism, and intense pressure from a nation and a global audience alike. Every rally carried historical weight. Every point scored would resonate beyond the tennis court, sending a message about courage, perseverance, and the importance of self-belief. In homes and sports bars, across continents and time zones, viewers prepared to witness the culmination of a story months in the making. Social media discussions escalated, with fans debating tactics, predicting outcomes, and offering encouragement. Alexa's struggle had become collective. People invested emotionally in her performance, seeing reflections of their own challenges and victories in her journey. The stakes extended beyond rankings. They encompassed national pride, media accountability, and the power of resilience. This was not just tennis. This was history in motion, a real-time demonstration of how determination can counteract cynicism and how public perception can shift when courage meets adversity head-on. Golf Vibes committed to covering every facet of the unfolding story. From pre-match press conferences to point-by-point analysis, from interviews to behind-the-scenes insights, every element would be documented. Alexa's response on court would become a defining moment not only in her career but in the broader conversation about media responsibility, the role of national pride in sports, and the psychological endurance required to thrive under intense scrutiny. Every serve, volley, and ace would tell a story of preparation, resilience, and defiance against a narrative that had tried to diminish her before she had even begun. As first serve approached, the world held its collective breath. The controversy, the political intervention, the social media outrage, all had set the stage for a match that transcended sports. Would Alexa rise above the ridicule and expectations? Would the critics, once so certain of her failure, be proven wrong? Could the unlikely defense by Pauline Hanson, amplified by global media attention, be vindicated by the performance of a 20-year-old athlete from the Philippines? All signs pointed toward an extraordinary moment, a collision of talent, pressure, and narrative that few had ever witnessed in tennis history. Every point, every rally, every moment of composure would be scrutinized, celebrated, and remembered. Alexa's story is a testament to the power of resilience in the face of adversity. It demonstrates the dangers of unchecked media influence and highlights the critical importance of support for young athletes. More than that, it illustrates how one individual's courage can challenge a narrative, inspire a generation, and force a nation to reconsider the way it treats its heroes. As the tournament progressed, every victory became more than a personal triumph. It was a cultural statement, a rebuttal to cynicism, and a symbol of possibility. The court in Melbourne was ready. The audience, both in person and around the world, awaited a match that had already become historic. The players were prepared, the media spotlight was intense, and the story that began with public humiliation had evolved into a narrative of hope, resilience, and defiance. Alexa's journey was no longer just her own. It was a shared story of courage and perseverance, a reminder that even when the odds seem stacked, and even when the world doubts you, determination can redefine what is possible.